He did not scream when they hit him. Didn't he beg when they tore through the door? But when his dog limped into the light, bleeding and silent, he broke. You never think your life will depend on the one soul the world gave up on. Until it does. Part 1. The cigarette in the garage. David Keller had not planned to be in the garage that long. It was Thursday evening, late March in Laramie, Wyoming, and the sun had disappeared behind thick clouds before dinner. His hands were still greasy from changing the oil on the old Ford F-150. A pack of Camels lay open on the workbench, and he lit one without thinking. He had not smoked in nearly 6 months, but grief has a way of loosening resolve. The garage was small. Concrete floor. A faded Wyoming Cowboys banner hung over the tool shelf. It smelled like motor oil and old wood and comfort, in a strange, tired way. Bruno was asleep in the corner. The German Shepherd mix, nearly 80 pounds of muscle and loyalty, had wedged himself under the workbench again. He always did that when storms rolled in, did not like the wind. Didn't he like when the sky got mean? David took a long drag. The cigarette burned slow. He let his head fall back and stared at the rafters. It had been 2 years since his wife left, 1 since his dad died, 6 months since he brought Bruno home from the Laramie Animal Rescue. The dog had been passed over for months, listed as too aggressive, not good with other pets, needs an experienced handler. But David saw something in the dog's eyes that reminded him of his own. Tired, cautious, still hanging on. Bruno did not bark much, didn't chase balls, but he followed David from room to room, slept by the bed, and stood between him and the front door whenever a stranger knocked. Tonight, though, Bruno barely lifted his head when David coughed. It was 9:13 p.m. when it happened. The garage door burst open. Not from the wind, not from weather, from boots. 4 pairs of them, young men masked, shouting, fast, angry. David barely had time to turn. One grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the wall. Another struck his face hard enough to make his vision swim. A fist, maybe, or a flashlight? Where's the keys? Old man. One yelled, "You got a truck? We need the keys." David blinked blood from his eye. In the house. He muttered. They believed him. 3 ran inside. 1 stayed behind a wiry one with a tattoo on his neck and a rusted tire iron in his hand. David hit the ground hard. He could taste blood now, feel the pulse in his jaw. He turned his head toward the workbench. Bruno was gone. Truck's got a full tank. I saw it outside, the worry man mumbled, pacing. Why the hell's he bleeding like that? David did not answer. From the back of the garage, where the shadows were thickest, a sound stirred. Not a bark, not a growl, a low, deep rumble like a thunderstorm just over the ridge. The man turned, eyes narrowing. What the... Then he saw him. Bruno stepped out of the dark. His fur was standing up along his back. Blood, not his own, marked the side of his face. His right ear hung, nicked and trembling. He was not charging. Not yet. Just watching. Like a soldier waiting for the order. The tire iron clanged to the floor. The man backed up. David could see the whites of his eyes. You keep that thing away from me. But Bruno did not move. David lifted a hand. Slow. Painful. Bruno. That was all it took. Bruno lunged. And just like that, the garage filled with sound. Snarling. Screaming. Wood splintering. Something crashed into the toolbox. David tried to crawl, tried to sit up, but his head was spinning and his body refused. Then silence. Long. Heavy. Terrible. David reached out into the dark. Fingers shaking. Bruno. Something limped toward him. He squinted, and his heart stopped. Bruno stood there barely. His shoulder was slick with red. One leg was not touching the ground. He looked at David, eyes wild, then collapsed beside him with a whimper. David pulled him close. "You stay with me, buddy. You hear me? You stay." Outside, sirens rose in the distance. Inside, David held his dog's battered head against his chest and felt, for the first time in years, his heart cracking open. He did not know yet if Bruno would make it. He only knew one thing. He would never let go again. Part 2, the ride to save him. The flashing lights lit up the whole block. By the time the paramedics arrived, David was slumped against the garage wall, shirt soaked with blood that was not all his. One imp leaned over him, but David pointed, weakly, to the dog on the floor beside him. "Take him first," he said. "He is worse than me." Bruno did not move. His eyes were open, barely. His chest rose and felt like it hurt to breathe. The imp hesitated. "We can tea. He saved my life." David rasped. "Don't he let him die now?" A second responder, younger, with a tattoo of a paw on her forearm, crouched beside Bruno and gently placed 2 fingers on his ribs. "He is in shock," she murmured. "We will call the vet hospital." Emergency transport. They wrapped Bruno in a thick wool blanket, hoisted him onto a makeshift stretcher, and loaded him into the back of David's truck, now driven by a police officer. David rode shotgun in another cruiser, his head bandaged. Vision cloudy. He could not stop looking out the rear window. Couldn't he stop listening for sounds? Bruno did not make a sound. The Laramie Emergency Animal Hospital was small, but clean, tucked between a diner and an insurance office near Grand Avenue. They rushed Bruno inside through the back door, past a sleepy receptionist who blinked twice when she saw the blood. David tried to follow, but the nurse stopped him. "You are bleeding through your bandage. I am not leaving him." The woman looked at his torn shirt, the bruise swelling around his eye, the blood at the corner of his mouth. She nodded slowly. "All right, but sit and breathe." He sat on a hard bench near the intake door, hands shaking. Every few minutes, a beeping noise echoed from inside. Machines. Movement. Muffled voices. Then silence. Then a voice. "Keller." David shot to his feet. A woman in dark scrubs stepped out. Her name tag read Linda Vasquez. Her hair was tied back, streaks of silver at her temples. She looked calm, but her eyes carried years of nights like this. "We have stabilized him," she said, but it was close. David let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He has a deep laceration near his shoulder, some internal bruising. No broken bones, but he lost blood, a lot of it. We are running fluids and antibiotics now. David nodded. Lips tight. "Will he make it? He is strong," she said. "Stronger than most dogs I have seen walk through that door." She studied him for a moment. "Your dog. He has been through something before this." Has not he? David nodded again. Shelter said he was a stray, maybe used in fights. Came in with scars and a broken rib. Explains the instinct. Dogs like him, they do not hesitate, especially when they have found someone worth protecting. David swallowed the lump in his throat. Can I see him? She led him through the side hallway to a dimly lit room with glass panels and stands. Bruno lay on a soft mat under a warming lamp. One leg was wrapped. A tube ran into his paw. His eyes were closed. David dropped to his knees. He did not say anything, just rested his hand gently on Bruno's side. The dog stirred. Not much, just enough to let him know he felt it. An hour passed. Then 2. Vasquez checked vitals every 30 minutes. The assistant changed the fluid bag. No one rushed him. No one asked him to leave. Around 3, David was still sitting there, back against the wall, legs folded under him. He whispered stories Bruno had never heard. Told him about the time his dad used to take him fishing near Wheatland, about how he almost became a teacher, about the morning he signed the divorce papers and came home to an empty house. Bruno did not move, but David kept talking, because somehow this dog had heard him all along without a single word spoken. The next morning, Vasquez found him asleep beside the kennel, hand still resting on Bruno's fur. She did not wake him. She just draped a blanket over his shoulders and left the door ajar. They both needed this silence. They both needed to come back together. Part 3, the morning after the storm. David awoke to the scent of antiseptic and the low hum of machines. His back ached from the floor. The blanket draped over his shoulders had slipped, and his hand was still resting on warm fur. Bruno had not moved much, but he was breathing slow and steady. David sat up, groaning. Every part of him throbbed, but he did not care. The night before felt like something out of a nightmare, too raw to be real, too sharp to forget. Through the glass, sunlight began to pierce the clouds outside. A grey Wyoming morning, softened by the hush of early spring. Vasquez walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. Black, she said. Didn't he think you were a cream and sugar kind of man? David took the cup. You guessed right. She knelt beside Bruno, checked the IV line, gently pulled back the bandage on his shoulder. No sign of infection. She murmured, that is good. His heart rate's still elevated, but stable. David nodded, eyes never leaving the dog. How long will he be here? At least 2 more nights. Maybe longer. I do not like rushing recovery, especially with trauma cases like this. He nodded again, slowly, then hesitated. Doc, will he ever be the same? She looked at him, her expression softening. He will heal, she said, but I want to lie, he might always have stiffness in that leg, may limp a bit, might need pain meds when the weather changes. David looked down. He took a beating for me. She said gently, he made a choice, and he would do it again. Back in the waiting room, David sat beneath a faded poster that read, Companions for life, we save them, they save us. He stared at it for a long time. He remembered when he first saw Bruno at the shelter. The dog had not even come to the front of the kennel, just sat in the back corner, watching. Most people had passed him by, but David had crouched low and whispered, You tired too? Huh. That had been enough. The vet tech, a young woman named Kara, came out from the back with a clipboard. We would like to fit Bruno with a soft harness to support his shoulder once he is up, she said. We will also send you home with anti-inflammatories, a sedative for sleep, and joint supplements. Do you have a ramp at home? David blinked. A ramp? She smiled. To help him get up steps or into your truck. It will be easier on the healing joint. David scratched his chin. I can build one. That afternoon, he left Bruno for the first time. It felt wrong. Like turning your back on someone holding your heart. But he needed to shower, grab clean clothes, and start prepping the house. He stopped by the lumber yard. He picked up pine boards and screws and returned home to the quiet. The house still smelled like smoke and dust. The front door hung crooked on its hinge. His tools were scattered, some missing. The couch cushion was torn, but all David saw was the paw print smeared in blood near the garage threshold. He touched it, pressed his fingers into the dried stain, then wiped them on his jeans and got to work. By sundown, the ramp was finished. Not perfect but sturdy. He placed Bruno's bed by the fireplace, freshened the blanket, and set a new water bowl beside it. Then, without quite meaning to, he added something else. A small framed photo of Bruno taken 6 months earlier during their first snow hike together in Vale. Bruno's ears had been perked, his paw half lifted mid-stride, and his eyes clear and alert. David had never framed it before. Now it felt like an altar. That night, sleep came slowly. David lay on the couch, facing the dog bed, empty still, but in his mind, Bruno was there breathing deep, maybe dreaming of wind and wild grass. He whispered into the dark, "Come home soon, buddy. I miss the weight of you beside me." Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and in a small room across town, a battered dog twitched once in his sleep, as if hearing the voice that had pulled him from the shadows in the first place. Part Fork home is where you wait. 3 days after the attack, Bruno came home. The vet techs helped carry him out to David's truck. Bruno had a harness, now soft chest straps, that wrapped under his rib cage to keep pressure off the injured leg. His eyes were clearer, but tired. His tail did not wag. Not yet. David drove slow. The road felt longer than usual, every bump making him wince on Bruno's behalf. When they pulled into the driveway, David circled around, opened the passenger door, and reached under his dog's chest. "All right. We are home." Bruno did not resist, did not whimper. He let himself be lifted, cradled, and lowered gently onto the ramp David had built. The dog stood there for a moment, uncertain, sniffing the air. Then he limped forward, slow but determined, into the house. David had spent the entire previous night cleaning. He could not erase the bloodstains on the garage floor, not completely, but he scrubbed what he could. He fixed the front door, replaced the lock, set new motion lights outside. Inside, he laid down rugs so Bruno would not slip, replaced the old food bowl with a raised set for easier access, added a soft wedge pillow next to the bed by the fire. The moment Bruno saw that spot, the bed, the blanket, the picture frame above it, he exhaled and lowered himself down. Stiff and slow, David sat beside him, cross-legged. "You made it." Bruno turned his head slightly, eyes half-lidded. He did not have to respond. His presence was enough. The first night back was rough. Bruno whimpered in his sleep, soft, pain sounds that made David sit upright every time. Once, near midnight, Bruno tried to stand and could not. He panicked, nails scraping the floor. David rushed to his side. gently laying him back down. "Easy," he whispered. "You are safe. No one's coming through that door again." He stayed there, lying on the rug, hand on the dog's shoulder until the tremors stopped. Only when the fire died down did they both drift into a restless sleep. By morning, the house was filled with small movements. Bruno shuffled from room to room behind David, just like before, though slower now, with a slight tilt in his walk. The limp was real, but it did not stop him from following. He ate when David sat nearby, drank when the water was changed fresh and cool, even managed one tail thump when David brought out the peanut butter jar with his morning pills. Small victories, silent ones, but for David, they were everything. Later that day, a knock came at the door. David tensed. So did Bruno. It was the veterinary, Vase holding a small white box. "Pain meds," she said, "and a follow-up checkup scheduled for Friday." Bruno limped forward and sniffed her hand. She smiled, knelt, and scratched his neck gently. "He is doing better than I expected," she said. "He has got a stubborn heart." David watched the two of them, something pulling inside his chest. "You think he will ever run again?" She looked at him, not just the words, but the weight behind them. "He might not run, but he will walk beside you, and that is all he has ever wanted to do." That night, David took an old t-shirt, one he had not worn since the night of the attack, and folded it into Bruno's bed. The dog sniffed it, turned twice, and curled around it with a soft sigh. David turned off the lights, sat on the couch, and watched the slow rise and fall of Bruno's ribs. It struck him then deep, quiet, humbling. The house did not feel empty anymore. It felt alive, bruised, yes, limping, yes, but alive. Part 5: The Weight That Stayed. The days grew quiet, but not in the lonely way David remembered. There were no more outbursts in the house, no slamming of drawers, no voices echoing from a tovey left on too long. Just the sound of claws tapping across wood floors, water lapping in a bowl, and the soft click of the fireplace turning on. David kept the routine steady. Pills in the morning, checked Bruno's shoulder, a short walk 5 steps out the front door, 5 steps back, gentle brushing after lunch. Evening by the fire, no pressure, no expectations. Sometimes healing is not in what you do, but in what you do not force. One afternoon, while Bruno napped beside his bed, David stood at the hallway mirror. He touched the bruise still fading under his eye. The swelling had gone down, but the shadow remained like something branded into his skin. He thought about the night again. The fear, the violence, the helplessness, and the one moment when he thought it might all end, until a weight of muscle and loyalty threw itself into the darkness on his behalf. Bruno had made a choice. But why? Why a dog abandoned by the world, beaten by strangers, who had every reason to distrust people, would choose to protect someone? That evening, David took out the adoption papers from the drawer where he would stuffed them months ago. Name: Bruno. Breed: German Shepherd mix. Approximate age: 5 years. Condition upon arrival: malnourished, multiple healed lacerations, rear rib fracture, fearful of men, no known history. Behavior Behavioral notes. Withdrawn. No aggression in shelter. Avoids eye contact. David ran a thumb across the page. He would seen himself in this dog that much was true. But now, maybe the dog saw something in him too. Maybe the broken recognize each other not through words or wounds, but through the silence they both know too well. On the 5th night after Bruno came home, David brought out something he had not touched in years, an old leather leash. Not the nylon one he had been using. This one had belonged to Max, the dog his wife had taken when she left. Bruno sniffed it curiously, then looked up. "Want to try a walk?" David asked. The tail moved. Just once. But it was enough. They made it halfway down the block. It was slow, Bruno limping gently, David adjusting to his pace. The air was cold but dry, the Wyoming sky wide and pale blue overhead. Neighbors who had seen the story on the local news waved quietly. No one said much. A few kids pointed at Bruno, whispering, "That is the hero dog." Bruno did not react to the attention. He only looked up at David every few steps, as if checking, "You still here? Still with me?" And every time, David nodded. Bud, I am not going anywhere." That night, something changed. As David sat in his recliner, reading a paperback with one eye on the fire, Bruno lifted himself from the dog bed. He limped over and, without hesitation, laid his head on David's foot. David stopped reading. He did not speak. Didn't he move? Just stared at the scarred, tired dog now resting in the one place he had not dared since the attack. Not for food, not for need, just for closeness. David reached down, slowly, and placed his hand on Bruno's head. And in that quiet, a bond was sealed, not new, but reborn. Not loud, but unshakable. A man and his dog. Two survivors. Healing not just from wounds, but from years of being unseen. Part 6, the call that shouldn't have come. The snow returned midweek. Light flurries at first, soft against the window panes. Then a steady dusting that painted the fence posts white and turned the roof into a hush. Bruno watched from his spot by the fire, head resting on his paws, ears twitching at the sound. David sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through a stack of unpaid utility bills. The bruise on his face had faded to a yellow-brown smudge. The swelling was gone, but the weight behind his eyes that stayed. He looked up and saw Bruno's eyes tracking the flakes outside, soft and cautious. "You always this quiet during snow?" David asked. Bruno did not move, but his tail thumped once, slow, against the wood floor. Later that morning, the phone rang. David ignored it at first. He was not used to calls. Most days, if someone wanted him, they knocked, but something in the tone, the persistence, made him reach for the receiver. David Keller. His voice was rough. "Yeah. This is Emily from the Laramie Animal Rescue. You adopted Bruno from us about 6 months ago." David stiffened. "Is something wrong?" She said quickly, "It is just, I am calling because someone came in asking about him." David's grip on the phone tightened. "A woman?" Emily continued. Early 30s. She had an old photo. Said she thought Bruno might have been her brother's dog. Wanted to know if he was still alive. David stood slowly, glancing across the living room. Bruno was asleep. "Her name?" he asked. She did not leave one. Said she would call back. David felt his chest tighten. He lowered himself into the nearest chair. Did you tell her anything? Just that he was adopted and safe. We never give out personal info without consent. He nodded, more to himself than her. Okay. There was a pause. She left the photo. Emily added, said if the new owner wanted it, she hoped he would take it. David swallowed. Can I pick it up? Of course. That afternoon, David bundled Bruno into the truck again, not for the vet this time. Just a short ride. Bruno perked up at the rumble of the engine. His head rested out the window the whole way. Tongue lolling, ears lifted as if remembering what movement felt like. At the shelter, the staff greeted them with gentle smiles. Emily, a young woman with tired eyes and ink-stained hands, met David at the door with a plain envelope. He opened it there, in the parking lot. Inside was a photo faded, curled at the edges. A young man in military fatigues, crouched beside a thinner, younger Bruno. Same markings, same eyes, same scar under the left ear. The dog was smiling, and in sharp black ink on the back. Bastrop, Texas 2019. His name is Shadow. David stared at the handwriting. The name hit harder than he expected. Shadow. Not Bruno. Shadow. That night, David did not say much. He left the photo on the kitchen counter. Every time he walked past, his eyes lingered on it and on the name. It felt like a splinter in his chest. He sat on the couch, quietly watching Bruno sleep by the fire, curled the way he always did, one ear twitching, one paw stretched. Shadow, David said softly. The dog stirred, lifted his head, and for the first time in all their months together, looked straight into David's eyes without looking away. It was a look of memory, a look of yes, that once was me. David leaned forward, voice quieter. But you came back to me as Bruno. Bruno blinked once, then rested his head back down. The next morning, David made 2 bowls of oatmeal, one with cinnamon and blueberries, the other with boiled chicken and warm rice. He placed Bruno's bowl down gently. You are home now, he whispered. Name does not matter. You found your way back anyway. Outside, the snow had stopped. But inside, something softer had begun to fall, a sense of peace. Quiet and cold and clear. Part 7 steps worth taking. The vet's office had become a kind of second home. Not by choice, but by rhythm. Every Tuesday and Friday, David loaded Bruno into the truck using a sling and a short ramp. The rides were slow, quiet, but not unpleasant. Bruno's head rested on the seat, sometimes nudging David's elbow at red lights, as if to say, I am still here, don't worry so much. Vasquez always greeted them with a soft voice and a clipboard. They would begin physical therapy gently at first. Bruno hated the underwater treadmill, but tolerated it for liver treats. He limped through stretching exercises with grim patience. A veteran accepting the drill, David never left his side. His progress is steady. Vasquez told him after the 3rd week. Scar tissue is forming well. The joints more stable than I would hoped. David nodded. Will he ever run again? The vet sighed. Thoughtful. Maybe not full speed, but he might chase a bird across a yard someday. That is enough, David said. That is more than enough. At home, the recovery schedule was sacred. Morning meds crushed into canned chicken. 10 minutes of slow walking in the yard. Brushing. Rest. Short leash time in the evening. And always the quiet hour by the fire before bed. Bruno had begun standing on his own again. The limp was there, but less pronounced. His balance steadier. One afternoon, David came in from the garage and found him halfway up the hall. Tail wagging. Eyes alert. No coaxing. No prompting. It was the first time David had smiled without guilt in months. The house had changed. It no longer felt like a place for waiting or forgetting. It smelled of chicken broth and clean laundry. The windows were kept open now, just a crack, to let in the wind. Bruno watched birds through the front window, tail flicking in rhythm with their movements. David talked more to the dog, mostly. Short things. Observations. Half thoughts. You used to stare out that same window like you were waiting on someone, he said once. Now I think you are just enjoying the view. Bruno tilted his head, then laid it back down. Satisfied. The vet bills were stacking up. David had sold a few old tools, fixed a neighbor's fence, told himself he would pick up a few shifts at the auto parts store once Bruno was strong enough to stay home alone. But every receipt, every line item, joint injections, laser therapy, blood work felt worth it, because each one came with something money could not buy. A full breath, a solid step, a wag of the tail. He kept them all in a shoebox by the fridge. Not for the ears, not for reimbursement, for remembrance. One evening, as they returned from therapy, David noticed something different. Bruno stood at the foot of the ramp, looked up at the porch. Then, slow but determined, he climbed it unassisted. 3 careful steps. A pause. One more. Then he turned and looked back as if to say, "Did you see that?" David stood on the gravel, keys in hand. Stunned? Yeah. He whispered, "I saw it." He followed the dog inside, heart thudding like he would just watch someone take their first steps. Because in a way, he had. Later that night, David sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the old envelope, again the photo of the soldier with Bruno, then called Shadow. He looked at it for a long time, then at the dog now curled up by the fire. Names were just names. What mattered was who stayed, who stood back up, who healed. And Bruno, whatever he would once been called, was here now, still choosing David, still walking, still trying, step by step, scar by. Part 8, the letter with no return address. It arrived on a Thursday. No name, no return address, just a plain white envelope, left gently inside David's mailbox as if the postman knew it was not junk. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "If you are reading this, you must be the man who took him in. I do not know your name, but I know you saved his life. His name was Shadow. He belonged to my brother, Jack. Jack was a Marine. He came home from deployment in 2020, but not for long. Peace does not always take you all at once. Sometimes it comes for you in pieces. Jack was one of the kindest souls I have ever known, but he could not outrun the war inside him. When he passed, Shadow ran. No one could catch him. It broke my heart. I searched shelters for months. When I saw the photo on the news last week, the dog who stopped a robbery, I knew it was him. I knew those eyes. Please, I do not want to take him back. I just want to know he is okay, that someone sees him the way Jack did. There was no signature, only 4 words at the bottom. Thank you for loving him. David stared at the letter for a long time. His hands trembled not from anger, not even sorrow, but from the weight of it. He looked across the room. Bruno was sleeping with his muzzle buried between his front paws, tail curled, breathing soft and rhythmic. David read the words again. Thank you for loving him. He folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the box on top of the fridge, next to the photo, next to the vet receipts, next to all the pieces of the life they would stitch together. He did not tell Bruno what was in it. Didn't he have to? That weekend, Bruno seemed different. Not weaker, no. Just aware, more watchful, more still. He walked to the edge of the backyard and sat in the snow, nose tilted toward the sky as if scenting something only he could detect. David stepped outside, bundled in his flannel, and stood beside him. She found you, he said softly. Someone from before. Bruno did not move. Didn't he respond? But his ear twitched. She is not here to take you, just to know you made it. Bruno looked up at him, eyes dark and deep, and David felt something settle in his chest, a quiet acceptance, a knowing. The next day, David drove to the animal rescue. He left a small envelope at the desk. Inside was a photo of Bruno by the fireplace, wearing his harness, eyes soft, body whole again. On the back, he would written, he is home and loved. You were right, he is strong. You can tell her that. No need to write back. That evening, David cooked chicken stew. Real carrots, hand-pulled meat. Half went into his bowl, the other half into Bruno's. They ate together at the table, not side by side, but not far apart. After dinner, Bruno limped over to the back door and sat. David opened it. The wind was cold. The stars were sharp above the snow. Bruno stepped outside and stood there for a moment, nose in the air. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and let out a low, steady howl. Not long, not loud, just enough to be heard by someone, somewhere. Then he turned back inside, and for the first time since the letter came, David saw it again, the faintest wag of the tail, a goodbye to the past, a greeting to whatever came next. Part 9. What we carry. The snow began to melt in mid-April. Not fast, just enough to leave patches of muddy grass along the fence line and a sheen of water across the back deck. Bruno no longer slipped on it. David had stapled strips of rubber matting down. Not pretty, David muttered, hammer in hand, but neither are we. Bruno watched from the steps, head tilted slightly, eyes steady. He was moving better now, not fast, not even smoothly, but there was confidence in his gait again. The limp was still there. It always would be, but David had stopped measuring progress in miles. These days, 3 quiet steps meant the world. Twice a week, they still visited Vasquez. The routine had grown familiar. Physical therapy, stretching, supplements, pain meds on colder mornings, glucosamine in the evenings. Bruno knew the staff now. He would nudge the front desk for a treat before each visit and stand patiently on the scale like a tired boxer stepping into the ring. On one visit, Vasquez knelt beside him and ran her hand down his back. his spine's beginning to stiffen. She said, "It is age, mostly, and maybe some trauma catching up." David nodded. "I figured. He won't show it." "Not much. Dogs like him, they just get quieter." David looked down. "How long do you think we have got?" She paused. "Not clinically, but kindly. I do not know. But it is not about how long." She said, "It is about how good the days are." That night, David did not sleep. He lay on the couch with the fire dying low and Bruno curled on the rug nearby. Every few minutes, he heard the soft shift of weight. The dog was restless, legs twitching, breathing shallow. David reached down and touched his flank. Warm, tense. The next morning, Bruno did not eat. They returned to the vet. No emergency, no injury, just pain silent, creeping. Familiar? Vasquez adjusted the meds. She added warm compresses to the shoulder and showed David how to wrap a towel under Bruno's hips to ease pressure when rising. "It will come in waves," she said. "On the bad days, he will need help standing. On the good ones, he might ask for a walk again." David asked, "Will he know? He will feel it." She replied, "But he will also feel you. That matters more than we understand." David went home and built something new. A custom ramp, wider and lower than before, leading straight from the back steps to the yard. He padded it with leftover carpet, painted the wood, stood back and waited. Bruno did not hesitate. He stepped onto it, paused halfway, looked up and wagged his tail. Not much, just a flick, but David felt tears sting behind his eyes. In the evenings, they changed routine. No more walks down the road. Now it was sitting by the porch, Bruno's chin resting on David's boot, while they listened to the wind and watched the clouds roll across the sky. Sometimes David talked, sometimes he did not. Bruno was fine with either. He did not need stories. He just needed to be near the voice that had called him home. One night, David filled a second bowl one he had bought years ago, used once, and shoved into the cupboard when Max left with his wife. He filled it with warm broth and bits of turkey, placed it beside Bruno's regular bowl. The dog looked at it, then at David. "No reason," David said, settling into the chair nearby. "Just figured. Maybe you would like to eat like family." Bruno lowered his muzzle and ate. David watched the flicker of firelight on the old dog's fur and whispered softly to no one in particular, "I will carry the weight for both of us now." And in that moment small, quiet, dimly lit, something like peace settled between them. A knowing, a promise. He had rescued a broken dog, and now that dog was rescuing him right back day by day, limb by limb, breath by breath. Part 10, where the light touches the floor. Bruno's last spring came slowly. The wind softened. The birds returned. Snowmelt filled the yard in rivulets that glistened in the morning sun. David woke each day a little earlier than before, just to sit beside the dog bed and listen to Bruno breathe. The rhythm was slower now, sometimes uneven, but it was there, steady as a tide coming home. Some days were good. Bruno would rise without help, nudge David's knee with that heavy head, wait patiently by the back door. They would step onto the porch, move to the top of the ramp, and sit side by side as the sun rose over the neighborhood. Some days were not. He would refuse food, shiver without wind, whimper when the joint swelled despite the medicine. On those days, David would warm a towel in the dryer and wrap Bruno up beside the fire, reading aloud from the paper, or just letting the silence stretch between them like an old song they both still remembered. The vet came for house calls now. Vasquez never brought a clipboard, just a stethoscope, gentle hands, and a softness in her voice that said more than any chart could. "He knows it is time," she said quietly one afternoon, "but he is not in pain today. He is waiting for you." David sat back on the floor, stared into Bruno's eyes. "I have been waiting for you." That night, David made a final meal. Chicken, sweet potato, bone broth warmed just right. He placed the bowl down gently, and Bruno, tired as he was, licked it clean. Then he crawled to his bed by the fire and curled in on himself, one paw folded under the other, head resting on his old t-shirt. David lay down beside him, the way he had that first night after the attack. The house was warm, the world outside was still. He whispered, "You can go, buddy. I have got it from here." And Bruno, with one long exhale full of memory, gratitude, and peace, closed his eyes. They buried him beneath the cottonwood tree behind the garage. David built the marker himself, hand-carved, weather-treated oak, smooth and simple. Bruno, who came when I called, and stayed when I could not. Neighbors came, even the woman from the shelter, who left no name. She stood back, tears in her eyes, holding a photo of a soldier beside a younger version of the same dog, now at rest. They did not speak much. They did not have to. Some grief is best honored in silence. Weeks passed. David still walked each morning, still opened the door and let the wind greet him. He kept the ramp, not because he needed it, but because he liked to think Bruno would be wanted it there just in case another old soul ever needed the help. He left the water bowl, not full, just clean, waiting. One evening, just before dusk, David found himself sitting on the back steps again, hands in his lap, eyes toward the tree. The cottonwood leaves rustled, the air was warm, and for a moment, just a moment, he could be sworn he heard claws on the old porch planks. A familiar breath, the shift of weight settling beside him. He did not turn, he just smiled, because when a soul has walked beside yours that long, you never really have to look to know they are there. Not anymore.